Hi there. Eskom is a South African state utility providing electric power. Power is a word having numerous meanings and uses dependent on its context. Unpacking a few meanings and uses, as a noun, power can describe the ownership and capability to hold and impose authority, to control and dominate in a socio-political context. Supremacy and strength could be used as descriptors. As a verb, a formal description of power is given as force or energy that is or can be applied to work, such as electric power. And that's a definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Energy is synonymous to power in the domains of Eskom. Electric power. Another noun is electricity, which is not uncommon to our understanding. Electricity having been generated as the energy to power the world since the early 1800s. The history of the discovery of electricity and its development as a societal energy utility has been described as long and convoluted, marked by a myriad of technological milestones, conceptual and technical, from hundreds of contributors. And this is a description from Power magazine. There were significant world innovations in power utility developments during the mid to late 1800s, such as electric dynamos, generators and motors which produced constant direct electrical current for electrically energizing light and eventually to power economies. In their paper, Gorjau and Maritz state that the world is powered by grid systems, and the South African grid is dominated by Eskom, who exports energy and imports energy in and out of the Southern African states. Electricity in South Africa before Eskom. Eskom's online heritage site timelines South African electricity and energy milestones prior to and after its founding. Noteworthy developments include the first electric telegraph system used between Cape Town and Simonstown in 1860, electrical lighting at Cape Town railway station in 1881, South Africa's first telephone exchange in Port Elizabeth by 1882, electric arc lighting to illuminate Cape Town's Table Bay docks in 1882, electric lighting installed for the Cape Colonial Parliament, Cape Town in 1882, and Kimberley, South Africa's diamond city, was the first in Africa to install electric street lights in 1882, and apparently this was before London, which used gas street lamps at that time. By 1906, numerous electrical energy infrastructures had been developed, such as electric motors for gold mining, with the first central power station in Johannesburg including an electric lighting plant with generators powered by gas turbines, which technology further evolved into municipal electricity reticulation systems supplying Cape Town, Durban, Pietermaritzburg, East London, Bloemfontein and Kimberley, which expanded on its earlier street lighting development. These municipal supplies supported the development of overhead trolley wire electric trams, starting service by 1896. Transnet, the South African state-owned freight logistics enterprise, documents the two pioneer railway systems in the Cape and Natal as government infrastructure by 1872 and 1877 respectively, with further rail developments culminating in the founding of South African Railways and Harbours by 1910. In its early days, the SARNH mooted replacing steam power with electricity for their locomotives. In 1920, a London-based engineer analysed and reported on this electrical transition, which resulted in the Electricity Act of 1922, a major milestone. This legislation called for the generation and supply of affordable electricity where needed, with regulation to be controlled by a parastatal. Affordable electricity would be implemented by a non-profit, non-loss operating model. To enact this model, the Electricity Supply Commission, Eskom, with a C, was established on 1 March 1923. Its first obligations at that time were taking ownership of existing rail electrification projects and establishing power stations in Cape Town, Durban, Sabi and Witbank. Demand for electrical energy supply grew exponentially as South Africa's gold mining industry proliferated. Larger power stations, predominantly coal-fired, were built. The 1950s post-World War years saw a boom in economic growth, given war-aligned technology being adapted for socio-economic infrastructural build. Substantial increases in industrial growth pressed Eskom with supply challenges, which resulted in widening the Eskom grid using newer technologies. It can be argued that the 1923 establishment of Eskom with a C and the post-war industrial expansion, bringing industrial and commercial electrical machinery as well as domestic consumer appliances, was the spark that energized the South African subcontinental power grid. Eskom lights up. Given the prevailing high demand cycles for electricity, in 1964, the South African government of the day realized the prospect for regional power amalgamation and amended the Electricity Act, authorizing Eskom to generate bulk electricity for neighboring states. Lesotho received Eskom power in 1967. The town of Rossana Garcia in Mozambique received Eskom power in 1969, followed by Lorenzo Marques, which was renamed Maputo, in 1972, and Swaziland in 1973. Eskom archives show that by 1974, Eskom electricity demand had grown by 13%. The Cahora Bassa hydroelectric power project on the Zambezi River in Mozambique, a joint venture between South Africa and the Portuguese government, was started in 1968 and culminated along a 1,400-kilometer route to South Africa's Apollo substation in May 1975. The advent of the United States atomic bombs deployed to defeat Japan saw disruptive energy technology evolving for electricity generation. Hyped interest, research and development pursued nuclear energy for peacetime purposes, and in 1951 the American Atomic Energy Commission established the process to generate electricity from nuclear energy using uranium fuel in steam turbines. With ever-increasing demands for energy in the Western Cape, Eskom began to build the Koeberg nuclear power station outside of Cape Town in 1972, with eventual commissioning of the power units in 1984. South Africa would develop the processes to supply and enrich its own uranium for Koeberg. And so it was that through national and regional infrastructural build of Eskom by the early 1980s, the South African government had developed a Southern African grid which was proving successful for generating, transmitting, and distributing reliable energy for the benefit of the entire country and the region. (1980 to 2005), 25 years of substantial events shaping Eskom. During the 1980s, South Africa's apartheid policies saw growing international discontent. The world also continued to demand South Africa's gold, steel, iron ore and coal. Revenues basically kept South Africa's government's resolve in terms of keeping its franchise. However, South Africa had no oil and no commercial gas, and what this did was it continued a growing reliance on coal. Electrical energy demand was increasing 9% annually, and in 1984, Eskom's regional production was 96% per market. This was based on a no-profit, no-loss model, which had been implemented decades earlier. This model basically strove to provide the cheapest pricing strategy to benefit consumers and economic development, but was no longer tenable. In view of this, the Electricity Act was reviewed, with new legislation introduced to scrap the no-profit, no-loss principle. New accounting practices were brought in line with standard business procedure. Eskom was becoming a privateer. The new Eskom Act was legislated. Eskom was renamed from Eskom with a C to Eskom with a K. No loss, no profit principles were withdrawn. However, the utility was placed under substantial pressure to electrify as many houses as possible. And in 1991, the Electrification for All project was implemented. This targeted 1.75 million homes to be electrified by the year 2000. Eskom achieved this by November 1999. In essence, it was a forerunner to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7, which requires that the world ensures access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. In 1994, political transformation in South Africa saw the ANC come to power. At the same time, Eskom's senior management changed guard as well, and the new guard came in with a similar thinking framework as the new government. Trends basically that abounded at the time was that South Africa's power grid was managed by Eskom. Southern Africa's power grid was managed by Eskom. Eskom was South Africa's largest state-owned enterprise. Eskom was also Africa's largest electricity supplier. Through all of this, Eskom had become a business brand. On the downside, Eskom's aging coal-fired power stations had become overloaded and under-maintained. From 2005 to the present day, Eskom had lost its spark. In fact, its sparks were burning. Recapping, 1984's production was at 96%. By 2013, it remained pretty much the same at 95% of all South Africa's electricity. Customers exceeded 5 million, 4.3 million homes had been electrified, and Eskom enjoyed the 15th spot in the world in terms of an electricity utility. By 2013, however, Eskom needed to report aging power stations which required focus to maintain and improve performance. It also had evolved into an expanding vertical integrated utility. It had become a monopoly, it had special government relationships, it was centralized with private sector coal supply, and it was staffed with organized state labor. Subsequently, this was tantamount to failure in enterprise governance and also led to political and state capture. In 2016, former public prosecutor Thuli Madonsela released her state capture report, which was followed by the Eskom inquiry as well as the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. From 2017 to 2023, South Africa's national GDP had been slowing. Energy demand and its consumption was obviously declining, and there was Eskom mismanagement, increasing operating costs, unmanageable debt, and deteriorating supply of coal. This led to load shedding, which actually had begun in 2007-2008, resumed in 2014-2015, and has been continuing since 2018 to the present day. From the energizing days of Eskom in 1923 through to its realignment in 1987, through to today, the Eskom trends are quite dour. The enterprise has mounting debt of 423 billion rand. There's a falling availability of generation capacity, currently sitting at 58%, compared to the 95% that was average up until 2013. There's been an increase in load shedding or rolling blackouts. 2022 saw 157 days load shed. Generation costs have been rising and thus putting pressure on tariff prices with a 34% increase in 2023. And then there's government ineptness on the key reforms required in financial sustainability, governance and transparency, operational performance, the implementation and driving of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, or the REI4P. There's procurement irregularities and underinvestment there. Obviously, there's curbing bailouts that basically haven't been attempted and looked at. 263 billion bailout between 2009 and 2022 has now been again set with 254 billion rand bailout for 2023. There's been CEO harassment and ostracizing, with the CEO who was charged with righting the wrongs having left. And then, of course, all of this has an impact on South Africa's GDP, with the South African Reserve Bank indicating a negative 2.1% for the third quarter in 2022. An important area to monitor trends is Eskom's power plants. Currently, Eskom's coal-fired power stations are aging, with an average of 40 years across them. There are 29 power plants in the country, 14 of which are coal-fired. We have 4 gas or liquid fuel turbines. There are 3 pumped storage facilities, 6 hydroelectric plants. We have the nuclear Kuba plant. We have 1 wind facility. Very importantly, coal-fired plants provide a capacity of 84% for the region. Mismanagement, corruption and sabotage still persist within the environment, and this has been alluded to quite succinctly by the now departed CEO. During COP26 in 2021, South Africa penned its Just Energy Transition Plan, where it sought out funding of 8.5 billion from Western donor countries to plan and implement the closure of 7 of its coal power plants by 2030. One, the Komati plant, has already been decommissioned, with the site now to be repurposed for renewable energy projects. We've looked at Eskom trends. Let's look at a few misconceptions and myths. This is important for future studies and planning. Firstly, a nationwide blackout. It's probable but highly impossible by virtue of the fact that we have load shedding schedules. Load shedding, in fact, is forced reduction in demand. In essence, where supply is reduced, so then is demand cut to balance it out. If we didn't have load shedding, then we most likely could have a blackout. Are all staff at Eskom incompetent and corrupt? Highly unlikely. Given the fact that we still have power, there are plenty of staff that are working overtime to try and right the wrongs. A case in point being the recently departed CEO, who unfortunately was forced out as of late. Let's have a look at aging coal-fired power plants. Comparisons have been made to the United States, who have similar plants. Their plants are producing an energy availability factor quite high. In South Africa, we have one of our oldest plants, being Camden, producing 70%, which is quite substantial. One needs to look more to the mismanagement, the corruption, the non-maintenance as more of a major factor than the age of the plant. Lastly, is there going to be continued state control of Eskom? Well, one needs to consider that at the current state that we're in, government seriously has to look at conceding some form of privatization in terms of maintenance, at least going forward. With this as the current status of South Africa's energy supply and Eskom, what do we do? What are our plans? What view does the future window present us? Do we bemoan? Do we give up? Or do we cuddle? Do we nurture? Do we look for ways to grow forward like any mother would do? So yes, let's get back up and right again. We can and we need to. It's our only chance of survival in this beautiful country of ours. We need an energy supply system that was as strong as it had been in the past. We can do this by using an exploratory technology forecasting method as well as a normative technology forecasting method. With exploratory, we have understood some of the current status issues through research. We understand some of the trends and the myths. We've looked at some of the expert opinions. We understand where we lie economically. We need sound project management to take it to the next step of planning. We need to look at S-curve analyses to understand where the technology of the future will begin, how it will grow, and how it will mature. We also need to employ scenario planning and modeling to ensure that we can achieve net zero in line with the UN SDGs. The renewable energy is back on the horizon. It's been rejuvenated in terms of government, and we need to throw a substantial amount of effort and focus on that. And we can do 3 horizons planning. We can set plans for the 2030 horizon, the 2035 horizon, the 2040, and perhaps even the 2050 horizon. Expanding on exploratory technology forecasting, it's critical that we throw a massive amount of focus on renewable energy sources. We need to reach net zero. Current technologies include solar photovoltaic systems, turbine systems, and hydro systems. A quick SWOT analysis gives us that South Africa has a suitable climate for all 3 of these. There is strong private sector ownership possibilities. We have sustainable clean energy sources in wind, in sun. Weaknesses, we have a skills shortage, but that can be built on. We have a poor infrastructure, we need to look at that. And currently there is low investment in the R&D, but it has been rejuvenated. Our currency is also quite volatile. The opportunities abound, however, and to name a few, there's opportunities for foreign direct investment, with the RE4IP being reopened. Infrastructural development would take place. We would also increase our energy security, and we'd be able to diversify our rural economies. There are threats. There's localized environmental derogation. There's social strife in terms of implementing these technologies in the rural areas. There's unionism and our continued reliance on coal. The last and biggest, obviously, is government ineptness and crime and corruption. Going forward, in terms of these technologies, it would be worthwhile to plot them using S-curves to understand at what levels we need to look for innovative next phase. Why? There's an evolutionary growth cycle and maturity in these products. It will eventually present with diminishing returns. We need innovation transitions, and we need to ensure that our energy availability functionality of these technologies is maintained. An S-curve analysis helps us to achieve this. The graph on the left-hand side simply gives us an indication of when the technology is introduced. It allows us to plot the growth. It allows us to show when the innovation window is. However, it also shows us when you will have maturity and perhaps decline, needing the thinking for designing a new transition. We can do this by plotting what is required for the three horizons, what we need for 2030, what we need for 2035, and what we need for 2040. In tandem with explorative technology forecasting, we can employ normative technology forecasting. It's futuristic. It's looking at a desired future. We currently have fiber in the ground, in the air. It's emitting light odes, creating a communication channel. Why not look at fiber in terms of transmitting electrical ions? Why not? Let's have a look at that. We can look at ways of designing this future by using thinking frameworks, systems, critical, creative, original design and divergent thinking, converging toward perhaps a game and game thinking. Once we've painted out the picture of the future, can you imagine going the next step in terms of taking laser beams that then transmit electron ions? Concluding this, we can look at appropriate actions into the future. Specifically, renewables must be focused on because they are charged again. Renewables actually have their historical roots in South Africa back in 1981. The government of the day for the first time started understanding energy poverty, and by 1986 allowed for private enterprise commitment. In 2003, a renewable energy white paper was tabled, and by 2011 the REI4P was launched. However, this came to a grinding halt in 2015 for reasons aforementioned. In 2021, however, the REI4P was relaunched and bid window 5 was opened. We also need to look at regulatory reformation continually. 2022 saw the Electricity Regulation Bill amendments, which is a good thing, and this was subsequent to the 2021 Electricity Regulatory Act, which continues to press for decentralization, privatization, and focus on renewable energies. We could also capitalize on environmentalism and the civic action that comes hand in hand with it. In 2020, President Cyril Ramaphosa founded the Presidential Climate Commission and Just Energy Transition. Concluding this focus on energy technology, appropriate actions into the future should be a sound and solid focus on renewables because they are charged again. In fact, renewables have their history in South Africa back in 1981. The government of the day first started understanding energy poverty around about 1986, and private enterprise commitment was allowed. In 2003, the Renewable Energy White Paper was tabled, and by 2011, the REI4P was launched. However, by 2015, this came grinding to a halt for reasons aforementioned. In 2021, however, the REI4P has been relaunched and bid window 5 has opened. There's also a need to look at continual focus on regulatory reformation. In 2022, the Electricity Regulation Bill amendments was tabled, and this was subsequent to the 2021 Electricity Regulatory Act amendment. These focus on allowing for decentralization and continued action towards sustainability. One can also focus on environmentalism and capitalize on the civic action that goes hand in hand with it. In fact, in 2020, President Cyril Ramaphosa founded the Presidential Climate Commission, which is an independent body to focus on the requirements of meeting zero net emissions. It also goes hand in hand with the just energy transition of Eskom. Lastly, the Zondo Commission and state capture. There needs to be a continual pressure placed on judicial action to be followed through. Thank you for your time.